we are the topic of discussion today is the concept of biblical failure, men behaving badly. And so the idea obviously has been ruminating. Unfortunately, the media is filled with stories of people who are in power, who behave badly. And sometimes these stories are very, very embarrassing, and they're embarrassing to the Jewish community. And it just so happens that some of the most well-featured stories are being featured at a time when we read the Torah portions of Genesis and Noah, which, if you think about it, these stories, which basically help us to understand the beginning of humankind, is a string of failure. But not only just regular failure, but really, really bad behavior. Yeah?
Is any part of the Torah not about failure?
Well, there are some good things, right? I mean, the Jewish people are constantly praised as God's children, right? A light unto the nations. There is the positive. There is the positive. But you're right. The Torah is very heavily negative. Very heavily negative. And there's a reason for that. Mainly because of the adage that all of our parents told us and we tell our own children, learn from my mistakes. Right? So that's why the Torah is very heavily negative about the mistakes of the Jewish people in its formation, so that we should know better from there on and not make those same mistakes. But in the very beginning of humanity, we see ultimate failure. And not only do we see individual failings, but according to what the Torah says, God decided to annihilate everything on the face of the earth. So we should probably figure out what they did wrong. So if you know the Bible story, and most people at least know some level of the Bible story, even if you've never read the Torah, there's a brand new world. A world that's created in Gan Eden. Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. What does Eden mean? Anybody know what that word means? Eden? It means pleasure. It's a perfect world of ultimate and absolute pleasure. That's where Adam and Eve were. And there was this divine hope. Divine hope. That in the creation of the human being, perfection would very soon come to be. And that hope was shattered. That hope was shattered. The holiness of the Garden of Eden, of God's presence being so known, of literally being naked and not being embarrassed. The holiness of what it means to be a human being, that was eclipsed by sin, by choosing badly. And then, of course, we know that Adam and Eve were evicted from the Garden of Eden. So, what did they do wrong? Well, according to the Torah, they didn't listen to what God said. In fact, they did the exact opposite. So let's move one more story forward, the story of Cain and Abel. From our perspective, Cain did something that was unparalleled in devastation. He killed his own flesh and blood. Murdered someone in cold blood. But did he break any laws? God didn't say don't murder. The law of don't murder happened a couple of thousand years later.
But he did deny it.
He actually didn't deny it. He didn't answer the question.
Okay, that's sort of evasive.
Basically, he said, and perhaps we can find the answer in his answer, am I my brother's keeper? I mean, perhaps he was confused. Do I have to really be responsible for another person's life? Do I even have to care about another person's life? There's no rules, there's no laws. You didn't tell me anything. So here we have Cain, who murders his brother. But did he do anything wrong? We know by Adam and Eve that it was clear and unequivocal that they broke one of God's commandments. God said, don't do it, they did it. What about Cain? Let's move one more story forward. The story of the people, the community, the world, humanity at the time of Noah and the flood. Here we have a story where the entire human race is found guilty of such deep corruption that God decides that all of humanity has to perish. Not only of all of humanity, but every creature on the face of the earth has to perish, annihilated. What did they do wrong? Sure, we know it says there was thievery, there was corruption. But was there any law that said you couldn't steal? Was there any law that said you couldn't be corrupt? Come on in. Sure, no problem. So, what did they do wrong? I want you to look at your first source right here. What was wrong with this generation, the generation of the flood? It says, man began to increase on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them. The sons of the powerful saw that the daughters of man were good, and they took themselves wives from whomever they chose. What was the corruption of this society?
Giving birth to daughters?
It wasn't giving birth to daughters.
The sentence doesn't seem to make sense, though.
So what is the crux of the statement?
The increasing?
No, the sons of the powerful saw the daughters and they took them from whomever they chose.
Sounds like it was perhaps against the will of the daughters.
It was against the will of the daughters. You had powerful people objectifying women. And those powerful people, those powerful men objectifying women was, according to the Torah, exactly what was wrong with this society. It was a society based on power and victimization. And this is a far cry from the original relationship of Adam and Eve if you look at the next source. The man said, now this is bone from my bones, flesh from my flesh. She shall be called Isha, woman, because she was taken from man, Aish. Therefore, man shall leave his father and mother and be united with his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Adam didn't objectify Eve. Eve was created to be Adam's equal. And just a few generations later, humanity becomes so corrupt that the people who were in power end up objectifying women. That's how it expressed itself. But what it really was a society based on whoever is powerful gets to choose who the victim is. But again, what was wrong with that? What was wrong with that? It doesn't say anywhere leading up to this entire episode that God demands not to do that.
Isn't the collective punishment also a problem? 'Cause
What do you mean?
It's only a certain group of people who are the sons of powerful, and then everyone's punished.
It's a good question. The traditional answer is that because society was based on this principle of the powerful and the victim,
It was everyone's aspiration.
it was everyone's aspiration to become someone powerful so that they could victimize others. And it became, unfortunately, a culture within humanity. I'm not gonna ponder if we're in that same situation today. That I'll leave that up to you to think about. But it was definitely something that warranted total annihilation. Even if you don't believe in the flood story, let's say you don't believe that the Torah, the stories happened. The lesson is that the Jewish ethics within this Torah story is that kind of activity is worthy of annihilation. The Torah says God regretted because of this, because of the powerful victimizing those who were less powerful. It says in the Torah, God regretted even making people, making humankind. So that lesson is clear. How we're supposed to sort of fine-tune our own lives and how we're supposed to relate to others. But for them, what was wrong? So the question really is, are we born good or are we born bad? How were we created? Good? Is our foundation the foundation of good and sometimes we're tempted to do bad? Is our foundation bad and we learn how to be good?
I think that we start off bad because like babies, they want everything for them. They don't think about giving. You have to be taught how to give, but taking is natural.
You're absolutely right. And generally speaking, we, within the traditional community, we explain it is explained in spiritual terms that a person only gets their Yetzer Tov, their desire to do good, when they reach bar and bat mitzvah age. That before that time, a person is Yetzer Hara. They're only selfish. They're only takers. And at the moment, there's a switch. There seems to be a switch in bar bat mitzvah age where a person understands altruism. What?
As bad as a baby tries to be, it can't be that bad.
It's not bad. The bad is
It
not.
really can't accomplish that much.
You're right. When we say Yetzer Hara, we don't mean evil. But we do mean that the focus is on self. The focus is on self.
Right, which is obviously, it's necessary.
That's why God created them that way. But it's necessary and it's part of the plan. But the focus on self is what the issue. As I explained at a program that I was teaching the other day, in general, the foundation of sinful behavior in Judaism is a focus on self, and the foundation of a mitzvah in Judaism is the focus on the other or humanity.
I'm just going to say, to me, I believe the opposite. I believe a child is dependent on an adult. I don't think that makes them selfish. I don't think that makes them bad. I think what makes them bad is as they come through society, they are corrupted by the toxicity in society.
Right. We're not saying that a baby chooses to be selfish.
Or even a young adult.
We're not saying that they choose to be selfish. We're saying that the plan is that the plan has always been that the focus of all of those things is to be a taker. And to be a taker, just in general terms, not a malicious taker, but in general terms, a baby is a taker, not a giver. Definitely not a thoughtful giver. I mean, maybe if you have a baby, you feel sort of that closeness and connectedness, and that you hold your baby and you feel that baby is giving you purpose, maybe meaning, love, relation. You could imagine that the baby is giving all that to you, but that's actually all just you. It's not the baby. So the general concept of being a taker is why the Talmud says that children are Yetzer Ra. Their inclination is on the other side, the bad side. Not because they're bad, but because they are intrinsically programmed to be takers. Not to really get off topic, because this really is off topic, but there's a principle within Judaism. It might even be a Torah commandment to be like God. As the Talmud says, we see in many places in Scripture that God is merciful. You have to be merciful. So we also know that God is not a taker, because there's nothing that you can do for God, and God is only therefore a giver. So that's how we're supposed to accustom our lives as well. But our focus should be on being the giver, not on being the taker. Sometimes being a taker is being a giver, but our focus should be on being a giver. But what do we say? Are we born good, or are we born bad? Judaism teaches, the Torah is telling us that we are capable of both. We are both competitive and compassionate. On the one hand, we're fighting over important resources, and we go to war over those resources. And on the other hand, we could not continue to survive if we were not part of a group. And this concept of, I'm compassionate to my group, but fierce toward those who are not my group, was the failing of the generation of the flood. The men of power, they were in their country clubs. The men of power were all together, unified as men of power, to victimize and objectify those who couldn't and who were not part of that group. And here we have, so to speak, God originally hoping that humankind would just get it and not fall into the trap of, your group is not my group, and so therefore I hate you. But it didn't work out that way. The world was created with beauty and order, and then God created the human being, and the human being created chaos. The flood and the annihilation of this chaos was sort of a regenesis. That Noah and his children would be the new Adam and Eve. That the original plan just didn't work. What was the original plan? What was the original plan? If you look in the Torah, in Genesis, in the beginning of Genesis, chapters 1 through 3, it says a word 7 times. One specific word 7 times. Anybody know what that word is?
Wild guess.
Yeah,
Good.
exactly. Exactly. The word, very good, Isaac.
Yeah.
The word in the word in Genesis that appears 7 times is the word tov, good.
I think God's name appears more though.
Well, I'm saying that specific word
Yes.
appears 7 times. Tov. And in Genesis chapters 8 and 9, when the relationship between God and Noah is being formulated, there's another word that appears 7 times. Anybody know what that word is? Brit. Brit. Covenant. Law. The original creation was based on the hope of good. And all of creation is good. Except for one piece of that creation. Everything else around us is intrinsically good. But there's one element of creation that is not intrinsically good. And what is that? That's mankind. The original hope was that mankind would follow the natural order. The birds, the trees, the sky, the sun, the grass, the butterflies. It's all good. The hope was that human nature would follow along with the trend. But it did not. And so there had to be a restart. God had to push the restart button. And that restart button introduced something and changed the status quo. The basis of human behavior and the concept that would override all other concepts in the world was no longer good. It is moral law. In Genesis, it says that we were all created in the image of God. Here, look at what I write on the number 3. God created humanity in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. That's in the first part of Genesis. In the second part of Genesis, what does it say? Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God has God made mankind. What's the difference between those two statements? The first statement is, I am in the image of God. When everybody reads that, that's what they say to themselves. I was created in the image of God. I'm powerful. And what does the second statement say? When a person reads the statement, what is he supposed to think to himself? You were created in the image of God. I have the power to kill you. And then God introduces moral law that says you may have the power, but you do not have the permission. That there are moral limits to power. That's what was introduced in the second section of Genesis. We have the power to rule. It says it in Genesis. We rule over everything. And then Genesis at Noah's time says there's a moral limit to that power. And we as human beings need to recognize that this is our failing. Without the concept of a moral law that takes into consideration that someone who is not like me is also created in the image of God, that someone who's not part of my group has rights, that someone that's not me or my family or my friends or my group, they have a right to exist too. And the reason why the Torah teaches us this at the time of Noah is because this has absolutely nothing to do with religion. Noah, according to our tradition, was the new beginning, the father of all of humanity. There were no religions back then. Noah wasn't Jewish. The universal moral code that Noah was given at this time is just exactly that. That is a moral, universal code for all of humanity. That I have to constantly be thinking to myself before decisions that I make, if those decisions impact others, is to be sensitive to the other. All of humanity is created in the image of God. The truth of the matter is, it seems like there's no greater time to really learn this lesson than now, with so many unfortunate situations that are given religious justification. The universal moral code came before religion. It's a human thing, not a religious thing. I have to be concerned about you. And so therefore my decisions that I make shouldn't impact you negatively. And if they do, I should think twice. Because if you remember, that's the behavior that God despised so much that he had to hit the restart button. The behavior was that I make decisions and I don't care about you. That's why God hit the restart button. I make decisions and I don't care about you or what it does to you. It's funny. It doesn't seem so bad. It doesn't seem like the greatest thing, Constantly we talk about in Judaism all sorts of mitzvahs and observances. This predates that stuff. This should be second nature to people. This is the universal moral code of humanity. So the Torah at this point is really stressing for us that we have a responsibility to help people understand this by living it ourselves. Anybody have any questions? Yeah.
I think you raised a really good question, which is, God didn't give the commandments, when he punished the generation of Noah, and he punished Cain for killing his brother, but he didn't ever say don't kill. How can, it's like if your parents don't, you're suddenly punished, you never knew that there was a punishment on record. It seems unfair to hit a kid before you've told them, hey, you're not allowed to hit your brother.
Right. So from those stories, it seems that you're right that it wasn't said, but it was something that was unsaid and hoped for. And it seems to me that within Jewish law, for example, someone who murders someone in cold blood like that is liable to the death penalty. So it seems, therefore, that Cain's punishment was nowhere near what we would imagine should be the punishment for someone who murders someone. But so I guess because there was no established law, that is why the punishment he was kept around, at least. So you're right. It does seem strange. It does seem very strange, and that's why I brought it up, in hopes that we can understand that there was this unspoken hope, it seems, from the Creator, that we would just get it, and we just didn't. But that's the message today. It's the message for you here. It's the message for the people who will listen, that God is hoping that every human being will follow the trend of all of creation, that trend being the trend of Tov, of good. But if not, then there's something that trumps that, and that is the concept of moral law. And so what moral law teaches us is, just because I think it's good doesn't necessarily mean it is. So I'm gonna let you go now, and I really appreciate you coming out for our discussion. And I hope you enjoyed it.
Can you repeat your last sentence?
Pardon me?
Can you repeat the last sentence you said?
Just because you decide that something is good, if it impacts others in a negative way,
Thanks so much.
it's not good. It's not necessarily good. People are constantly filled, when people ask me, Rabbi, what is good? And they say, to me, my good is different from your good. I'm sorry. That's really not true.
Because everybody.
Judaism believes that there's a universal good.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Stay well.